Welcome to Penelope's Playground, Block A. I'm Allison from Quilt & Code, and this is a brand new mini quilt quilting series that's a block of the week. If you have been looking for the perfect way to learn how to use and master your Stripology rulers, you have come to the right place. We are chock full of wonderful techniques to help you learn how to use your rulers. We're also going to be learning in Block 5 how to applique on minky fabrics. You want to stay around for that. Follow along as we build this quilt block by block. My patterns are released by email for free during the series, so be sure to sign up in the description. Subscribe so that you don't miss a thing, and grab a kit if you want to use the same exact fabrics. Now, let's curl up and move in to Block A. We're going to use the Stripology Mini to cut strips out of 1 and 2 and squares out of 3. We're going to start with 1. 1 and 2 both need to have 1.5 inch strips. So I am going to fold my fabric. Now this is a full width of fabric, so I want to make sure that I am cutting on my folds. So I'm going to bring this up just like that. And then I am going to, if you have a Stripology squared, this will be easier. But because I'm using the Stripology squared mini and I wanted to make this a mini quilt, I'm going to show you how I do that. So we want to make sure that the fold lines of our fabric are horizontal, and I'm using the fold line up here. I brought my selvage up and I've got my fold line down here. Now I'm going to demonstrate how I can now bring this up, and I'm going to fold up so that I have my horizontal line here and that I have a horizontal line here. Now, this is a great time if you're doing this to bring in a 60mm blade. I do not have a 60mm blade, so we're going to make this work the way it is. When you're cutting with the Stripology ruler, you always want to start by cutting off the edge here. That gives you a nice clean cut, and that's what gives us our precision. Now, since I know I'm cutting through multiple layers of fabric, it didn't feel like I cut all the way through, so I'm going to go back to the beginning and cut this again. That felt better. Okay, now I'm doing 1.5 inch strips, so I'm going to go with the stars. I need 2 of them. And because I'm going through several thicknesses of fabric, I'm just going to run that one through one more time just to make sure. And then this is where my scissors come in, just in case I didn't get all the layers. Looks like I'm a little off here, just by a tad. There we go. All right, cool. So notice how, because we kept everything on those folds, our strips stayed completely straight. Okay, I'm going to do that with our number 2 fabric. I mentioned that you could do this with the squared ruler, so I'm going to pull that squared ruler out. And it's the same concept where I want to make sure that my folds are correct. And then I can bring this in just like this. And notice how up here we're horizontal and down here we're horizontal. I'm always going to start right there with the 0, and then I've got my stars down here to tell me my 1.5 inch strips. For my 3 fabric, I need to cut 2.5 inch squares of this fabric. It is easier to use my squared, so I'm going to keep that out here. You can do this with the squared mini, no problem. So you have your 2.5 and your 5, and you can fold it the same way I did before. My yellow fabric shows you just how off I can be on the side, so make sure that you're cutting off your zero line so that you get rid of that. We're going to need 16 of these 2.5 inch squares. I can get 16 out of one strip, so I only need one strip here. So I'm going to cut on my 0, and then the squares down here are my 2.5, so I will cut on that first square. Here is my 2.5 inch strip. So now I need 16 squares. I'm going to take my fold here and put it by my selvage. So there's my fold, and I'm doubled up here, so I have 4 widths of fabric. And then I can bring in the mini, or I can stick with my Stripology squared. I want to show you the mini simply because I'm hoping that you will use this little guy as much as possible. And so the way I would use this is I line her up, just like I did before, making sure that I'm horizontal in this strip. And like I said, I fold it over. And so what I'm going to do is bring this in just like this. And I'm going to get rid of that fold and salvage right away with my 0. This one does not have my squares, so I'm going to have to add up my 2.5 and my 5. And then what I'm going to do is just move my ruler over, move my squares out of the way, and now I can line up directly with this edge, and I can do the same thing again with my 2.5 and my 5. And this gives me all my 2.5 inch squares for block 1. I'm going to take one of my strips of fabric 1 and one of my fabric strips 2, and I'm going to stitch them together 1/4 inch all the way down the seam. The other one I'm going to take, and I want to cut these in half because I am going to use these pieces later in another block. So I'm just going to use my scissors and snip them right there in half. And we're going to stitch a fabric 1 to a fabric 2 all the way down, and we're going to leave these 2 pieces for later. I want to press toward fabric 2. So I have placed fabric 2 up so that I am putting my heat to begin with on my fabric 2, and then I'm going to take fabric 2 and I'm going to push it away just like this, opening it up. And so by giving it that little bit of heat, it just makes it so much easier to move this fabric over and make sure it stays flat. The other thing I don't want to do is I don't want to press too hard and push. That's going to distort my fabric. I'm just using the weight of the iron and just slowly using that heat and the weight of the iron to make sure that this is pressing open the way I want it to. These strips need to be cut into 1.5 inch segments. I am going to go ahead and line these up just like this so that I can do this half one while I do the whole one. And I'm going to bring out my Stripology squared too. If you have the XL, this is the perfect time to bring out the XL. What I'm looking for here is that I want to make sure that my stitch line is what is horizontal. So I'm placing that stitch line. This one looks really good. This one looks really good. So I am looking for the stitch line to be horizontal. And then I am going to follow those stars down here that are 1.5 inches. First thing we're going to start with is putting our little squares together. So we're going to flip one side and then put them right sides together. I wanted you to notice how we're going to nest these seams nice and neat together. So I just sort of put my finger just like that to make sure those are nested. And then I don't actually use a pin at this point, but if you're new, sticking a pin sideways so that it catches both sides can really be helpful. And then I would just stick that in a pile and get ready to go for the next one. It does not matter which way you press this. And once you're pressed, you want to make sure that you're at that 2.5 inch square. The inside squares here that are white, these are your 1/2 inch squares going out all the way to 6.5 inches on the squared mini. I am going to take my block and place it in the center here so that my vertical and my horizontal line are crossing where my seam lines are. That will give me a perfect square. I'm going to cut on the 2 inch and I'm going to cut on the 4.5 inch. I like to lift up and move anything out of the way. Then I'm going to turn it 90 degrees, bring it right back in, line it right back up with my vertical and my horizontal line, and then I'm going to go on the 2 and that 4.5 one more time, and I get my perfect square. All of the blocks are the same. They're all going to have the light green going through like that, or your fabric 1 going this way. So what I do is I stitch this one to this one and this one to this one, and then I am going to press. Once I've gotten this stitched, I'm going to press toward my fabric 3, and that way when I go to put this block together like this, lining up my and nesting my seams right here in the center, everything will nest in nice and neat because I've pressed that way. So I am going to go ahead and stitch a 1/4 inch down just like that. And I will end up with a block that looks like this. This block needs to be squared to 4.5 inches. So just like I showed you earlier with the 2.5 inch block, I'm going to come in here with my ruler, and I have the ability now to see the vertical and horizontal lines as well as my diagonal line going through the center and through the center of my other 2 squares. That just gives me so much accuracy. And then on this one, it's on the 5.5, and on the 1 that I'm going to cut, then I'm going to turn it 90 degrees. I'm going to line it right back up, noticing that my diagonal line is going through here, that I've got my vertical and my horizontal line, and then I'm going to cut on the 1, and I'm going to cut on that 5.5. And I'm going to do this with all the blocks. And that completes block A for Penelope's playground. I sure hope your cutting was clawsome. Don't forget to like and subscribe so that you can follow the full series. You'll find the pattern in the description, and check out our kits if you want to stitch along. See you next time for some absolutely perfect quilting. Happy sewing, everyone!